So now we are going to begin, and we are going to begin with a paper or a contribution by Professor Thornton Lockwood. Professor Lockwood is an associate professor of philosophy at Quinnipiac University in the US. He is also the editor-in-chief of Polis, the Journal for Ancient Greek and Roman Political Thought. His scholarly research focuses on ancient Greek and Roman philosophy and political thought. He has co-edited 2 volumes, Aristotle's Politics, a Critical Guide, published by Cambridge University Press in 2015, and Aristotle Politique 7, La Constitution selon nos voeux, published in 2019. An English translation of Aristotle's Economica is forthcoming for the new Hackett edition of Aristotle Complete Work. So we have among us a true Aristotelian. Professor Lockwood is author of numerous articles and chapters in edited volumes, and most recently, just the tip of the iceberg, Aristotle's Politics on Greeks and Non-Greeks in the Review of Politics 2021, Defining Friendship in Cicero's De Amicizia, Ancient Philosophy, so also Ciceronian, The Best Way of Life for Aristotle's Polis, an article, What Thomas More Learned About Utopia from Herodotus, from a conference where we actually met. And finally, Artemisia of Halicarnassus, Herodotus' Excellent Counsel, a piece forthcoming in Classical World, and a piece that will be the object of the presentation today, in conversation with, if I may say so, my own Artemisia in The Power of Women. So very grateful to Thornton, who is talking to us from the other side of the Atlantic. And I'm asking you, please join me in welcoming Thornton Lockwood.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia, for that wonderful introduction. So greetings from the morning in the US. It's a great honor to speak in this panel and to talk a little bit about Artemisia, this fascinating character about whom we have lots and lots of testimony evidence, but who has been read in several different ways. So I am going to screen share my presentation, which gives us a couple of images, more than just text to look at. As Julia mentioned, this is an article that originally I gave at a conference on female intellectuals in Cambridge in February 2020, right as things went crazy. And what I was trying to decide or to make sense of is there any way in which we should think of Artemisia as an intellectual? So I'll show you some text and so forth, and clearly she is recognized in antiquity for her bravery and for her contribution in the Persian navy at the Battle of Salamis. And a lot of our testimony evidence really focuses upon that aspect of her, shall we say, virility or her manliness. And what I want to argue is that you lose sight of a really, really important aspect of Herodotus's Artemisia when you make her just a sort of virile, courageous quasi-man. That Herodotus actually views her perhaps as the most wise counsel in his entire history. So as I said, I was working on this in 2019 and 2020, and I had staked out a position and tried to argue that we should understand her primarily as a sort of deliberative figure in Herodotus. And of course, what do I find but Julia's paper, which argues along very, very similar lines. And it was great to see my argument confirmed by Julia's own argument. So that's the connection with her work, and which I'll speak a little bit about in my presentation. But as I said, you know, when we ask who is, sorry, and I'm just trying to advance my screen, which for some reason I am not doing. 1 second, for some reason I'm not getting my PowerPoint to be able to advance.
Yeah, maybe you can just reshare. Sometimes that works.
Free share.
Another trick.
Huh.
There. I take it you guys are seeing the screen moving, correct?
At the time we are seeing you.
Okay. Let me try that one more time.
Now we're seeing the presentation.
But I take it not, there we go. Okay, so now both me and presentation, correct?
Yes, introduction
Okay.
slide.
And it's moving, perfect.
Excellent, okay, so this is a 19th century depiction of the Battle of Salamis with as you can see, Artemisia holding a bow, facing across to who is probably Themistocles, immediately below Xerxes, who is on a hill watching the battle and is becoming very, very upset. So when we think of the testimony and we think of the depictions of Artemisia, what we often find is a character like the French actress Eva Green, who portrayed Artemisia in 2014 in the movie 300, Rise of an Empire. So look at this image. We have a warrior. We have a sort of masculine warrior with these double swords, and you know, looks like someone who is going to be very, very dangerous if your trireme comes anywhere near her. When we look at the testimony evidence about Artemisia in antiquity, so there's a number of things that Artemisia is represented as doing. So that she is represented as fighting bravely at Salamis, we find in almost all of our sources. Aeschylus's Persians makes no mention of her, as does Diodorus Siculus. But Aristophanes and Herodotus and Plutarch and Pausanias and so forth, they all recognize that she is brave in battle at Salamis. But as you can see, in the case of Herodotus, we get something strikingly different. So in Herodotus's depiction of Artemisia, she is a advisor to Xerxes. Immediately before the Battle of Salamis, she gives a long speech about why Xerxes should not fight at Salamis, which I'll look at in a little bit. And following the defeat at Salamis, again, she speaks with Xerxes and advises that he should go home and let Mardonius take care of the Persian forces. So I reiterate, this is something that is distinctive of Herodotus's treatment. The only other source from antiquity which talks about her as an advisor is Plutarch, which I'll speak a little bit about, but he does so critically, because Plutarch thinks that Herodotus is exaggerating Artemisia's position. So I give you one out of many of the texts that sort of views Artemisia as a woman and as a brave woman, but as an oddity because of her. So in Aristophanes' Lysistrata, there's a male, or head of the male chorus, who invokes, and again, this is in 411 BCE, Artemisia. He's imagining all of these terrible Athenian women who have taken the Acropolis. And if we allow these women to keep going, they'll even be building frigates and launching naval attacks, cruising against us like Artemisia. And if they turn to horsemanship, you can scratch your cavalry. There's nothing like a woman when it comes to mounting and riding. Now, this is not necessarily Aristophanes' view, but it's a view that he's putting into the mouth of an Athenian chorus leader. So the notion that Artemisia is primarily to be understood as this brave but kind of gender-bending figure, this we find very commonly. Now, when we turn to Herodotus, we find something a little bit different. When he first introduces Artemisia in book 7 of the histories, he points out that he's not going to introduce all of the various admirals and captains of the Persian fleet, but he does find that Artemisia is an object of admiration. And to read a little bit, that she, a woman, served in the expedition against the Greeks. Now, there was a tradition of scholarship that read Herodotus as saying, I admire her simply because she is serving, that she is stepping up and and fighting in battle. And of course, women don't do that. And so that's why she is an object of admiration. But there's a scholarly tradition going back primarily to Rosaria Munson that said that you really need to think more broadly about what Herodotus is saying here, and that we need to focus on the fact that Artemisia is a character who shows initiative, who shows autonomy, and who at the end of this quote is under no compulsion to be there, and yet she is there. She shows initiative and autonomy, and it's not just that she's a captain. That's not the only thing that Herodotus is praising her for. It's really for her autonomy and initiative that Herodotus finds her so striking. Why is she so striking for Artemisia? Well, there is an army of scholars, and I mentioned first Rosaria Munson, but also Scylla Cochet and Julia, who have seized upon the fact that Artemisia needs to be understood not simply as a brave foil to the effeminate or unbrave Persians. We really need to understand her and recognize her for her wisdom. And again, I take my own paper is building on what this army of Artemisian scholars have already said. In terms of Julia's perspective, this is coming from her recently published piece on Artemisia. I just pick one quote from it. Since Herodotus places Artemisia first in the decision-making drama that precedes the Battle of Salamis, and then in the urgency of determining a course of action after the debacle, we must question his narrative montage. The attribution of multiple qualities to Artemisia, and what we would now describe as the intersection of gender and ethnicity, is achieved verbatim in the staging of a strong character, able to speak and act, which presupposes a marked ability to think in a reasonable and practical way. And as I said, when I was reading this around 2020, 2021, I was like, ah, I agree. that's what my paper is trying to say too.
I agree.
But I reiterate, I mean, I think where my paper intersects is that everything that's on this screen here that Julia finds in Artemisia, that she's a tactician, that she has audacity, that she's a strategist, I agree with. The one thing that my paper does that goes a little bit beyond what it is that Julia's paper was trying to do is to focus specifically on the advice that she gives to Xerxes immediately before the battle at Salamis. So it's my contention, and again, what this paper tries to do in a very detailed analysis of that speech, is that if you look at Artemisia's argument, and it is an argument, I mean, it's a deliberative speech in which she is trying to give advice to Xerxes. It is just extraordinary if you analyze how much she knows about the disposition of forces, how much she knows about geopolitical significance, how much she knows about what is likely to happen, and that Herodotus just packs all of this into the speech. So I won't work through the entire speech, but I just want to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. So prior to the Battle of Salamis, Artemisia has two pieces of advice, and you can see that I've sort of outlined them and I've labeled them within the speech. So her first piece of advice is that Xerxes should not fight at Salamis. That quote unquote, Xerxes should spare your ships and do not fight this sea battle. And then she proceeds to give two different reasons in support of that piece of advice. So the first is one of the most famous. These men, these Greeks, your adversaries, are at sea as much better than yours as men are than women. So here she is, you know, you remember she's the head of a specific squadron in the fleet. All of the other squadron leaders are saying, Xerxes, go and fight at Salamis, that you should undertake this battle. And here we have a female squadron leader who comes right out and says, Xerxes, your naval forces are weak. They're going to lose. They can't really fight well. And notice how, again, she's playing on gender here. I mean, this is a woman telling a male that his navy is feminine. And so that's an extraordinary piece of advice that I can't imagine any of the other squadron leaders advancing towards Xerxes. Now, the second piece of advice, I think, is equally interesting. And if you know the broader terrain of Herodotus's history, it plays upon this theme of imperialism and the notion that empire is a story that always ends in tears. Okay, so Artemisia says to Xerxes, why must you put all at risk in sea fights? Have you not Athens, which is why you set out to make the war? Now, you'll remember that Xerxes invades mainland Greece on some level as a response to the burning of Sardis during the Ionian uprisings in the late 490s. So he's following his father Darius, and that he wants revenge for the burning of Sardis. And there's passages where that is something that Xerxes articulates. But Xerxes, in Herodotus' telling, also envisions the possibility of an empire that bridges Asia and Europe, and that, as Xerxes has him, or excuse me, as Herodotus has him says, that the Persian Empire will extend as far as the sun will shine. So in other words, Xerxes is envisioning a kind of imperialism that would extend the Persian Empire all the way across mainland Greece and so forth. So notice what Artemisia is doing here. She's reminding him that his original objective was simply to seek revenge for the burning of Sardis. Well, of course, Xerxes has already accomplished that. You'll remember that of course, the Athenians, they abandon Athens and the Acropolis, and the Xerxes and his forces, they burn Athens to the ground, that all of the Athenians have left and are over on Sardis and so forth. So Artemisia is reminding him, you don't need to do this. And furthermore, if you do this, this will not turn out well for you. I take it that this is part of the anti-imperialistic argument that is running all the way through Herodotus. And again, if we think that Herodotus is writing in the 420s, this message, I don't just think is for Xerxes. I think that this is a message that Herodotus has in mind for, if you like, the Pericleans who are thinking about Athenian empire. So I think Artemisia becomes a possible spokesperson for the Herodotean view that Periclean empire is also a tale that is going to end in tears. Let me pause. How am I doing on time?
We are getting close to the moment where we might want to have a couple of questions. So let's put Excellent. It like that.
Okay, so then let me sum up, having had a chance to at least give you a taste of what I mean by Artemisia's argumentation, and then take questions. So what my paper does is the analysis that I just did on that first piece of advice, and you can see on some level I'm doing that with the slide that I'm sharing with you right now. If you go through her speech, she has extraordinary knowledge. She knows exactly what is going on the island of Salamis. She knows exactly the configuration of the various Greek forces. She knows exactly the challenges that are facing the Hellenic League. And she knows that if Xerxes just sits and wait, the Hellenic League is either going to collapse, or else if he attacks the Peloponnesus, that the Hellenic League will just explode. So this brilliant tactician, Herodotus is highlighting her wisdom. And that's my thesis. That is Julia's thesis, and I'll stop there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thornton.
We started in advance, actually, so we have a lot of time for discussion.
Yes, so we have 7 minutes that we will try of which we can try to make the best. So, of course, Thornton, thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I agree that first piece of advice is the most complex. It's really about the whole perspective of the narration, so much so that, in a sense, Artemisia knows what Herodotus knows as the narrator. I entirely agree. I think she is a gender theorist, Artemisia. her allusions to women and men resonate and come back again and again, or at least twice, in the exchange with Xerxes. And she knows what the Athenians have become too. I mean, the fact that the Athenians have become such wonderful andres, full of tumults, of prothumia, because of democracy. So yes, absolutely, Artemisia is a unique observer as a sort of double of the narrator. But I'm sure there will be questions, and we are happy to welcome these questions from the participants. Thank you. Yes, using the raised hand is the best. Nicholas Heckler.
Fascinating paper. I'm very interested in the questions related to power relations between Artemisia and the king. Is she powerful in that context because she gives the advice and tells him to hold on, not just run into battle, but think about things, and she takes that time to reflect and tells the king to do the same thing. Thus she becomes powerful in that context, and she suggests to the king to become the same, to not lose the war in the end. She's not successful, but with regard to the discussions here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you know, we all know, of course, the king doesn't take her advice. But what's intriguing is that Herodotus reports immediately after Artemisia gives her speech. So there's these plotters, and there are some that are pro-Artemisia and there's some that are anti-Artemisia. So the pro-Artemisias are like, oh, she's going to be in big trouble now. You know, she's going to get her head handed to her. And the anti-Artemisian faction is like, yeah, she's done. She's done for now. And you know, I mean, this is a more complex question about Herodotus, really. But he depicts Xerxes as admiring her and finding her opinions very, very well stated. But then, of course, he doesn't follow them. He doesn't follow them to his own disaster. The second speech. So again, and you know, if you think of call it the Artemisia logos in Herodotus, you know, it's sandwiched by these two speeches. There's the pre-Salamis speech and there's the pro-Salamis speech. So one of the nuances there is that in the pre-Salamis speech, so Mardonius is collecting opinions. So Artemisia is not even speaking directly to the king. She's speaking to his counselor, and then the counselor is going to take the advice. But in the post-Salamis advice, Mardonius is cut out of it. She's meeting one-on-one with Xerxes, and Xerxes follows her advice. So I take it that on some level, Herodotus's message is that Xerxes, to his detriment, he learns that you should listen to this wise advisor. And you'll remember, what is it, Lattimore back in the 30s identified this motif that runs all the way through Herodotus, the so-called the motif of the wise advisor. There's many of these, it's a trope that runs through the whole story. And sometimes the wise advisors are listened to, and sometimes the wise advisors are not listened to. And Artemisia is almost unique in that she is both not listened to and listened to. And again, I mean, Nicholas, I mean, it's such a rich passage. He listens and he doesn't listen. Does both, unfortunately.
That's true. Other questions or comments?
If I could throw one last thing in that I know in a previous delivery of this paper that was met with a great deal of criticism. You know, as I said, so Herodotus is writing in the 420s. You know, he's a colonist at Thurii. I mean, he must know everything that's going on with Pericles and Aspasia. So I've wondered, is Artemisia a stand-in for Aspasia? Is there any kind of when in an audience in the 420s, if they see Artemisia, are they going to say, wow, non-Greek woman, super smart, knows how to give a really, really well-crafted speech. And furthermore is giving an anti-imperialism speech. Is there any way that this may bring to mind Aspasia? And again, I've said this in previous audiences, and people are like, nah, that doesn't work at all. But since I have a new audience, maybe you'll find this more persuasive.
We will certainly think about it. Thank you. I'm sorry for the echo. But thank you very much. Yes, I think that during the first conversation, so to speak, quote unquote, because of the complexity of the utterance, but Xerxes thinks that he knows better because he says, oh, you know, so far we didn't succeed as we should have succeeded, given that we are a superpower, because I wasn't there. Whereas now I'm going to be present, and so my soldiers will see me and will be more effective on the battlefield. So I think that there is there, among other things, a sort of exposure on behalf of Herodotus of the self-blinding self-esteem of the great king. And this is what he's going to learn. He is going to learn, among other things, that yes, Artemisia was right. Artemisia will have been right. But thank you very much. If there aren't other questions, I think